Glenn, thank you for joining me again. And
Good to be with you.
You are in Rio, and therefore you know perfectly well that the revelations over Dilma Rousseff and her emails being spied on has caused her to cancel what should have been a state visit to the U.S. this past week. What, in your mind, has been gained by that?
Well, what's being gained is that the Brazilian people are learning of the severe assault on their privacy being waged by a government over which they have no control and over which they exercise no accountability. The first story that we did here was actually about mass bulk spying of Brazilians, tens of millions of emails and telephone calls that are being collected by the NSA regarding innocent people. And we then followed it up with the story about targeting their president for spying, the democratically elected ally of the United States, the oil giant Petrobras, and then conferences designed to negotiate economic conferences. And so as a journalist, my question is not, how can I best help the U.S. government? My question is, how do I inform people around the world of the things they should know? And that's what's being achieved by this story.
Do you make judgments about what is really worth putting out there and what isn't? I mean, certainly there, is an enormous amount. I mean, some have called it a digital dump. There's an enormous amount going out there. And everybody knows, as I said, that leaders are routinely spying on each other and spied upon, even amongst allies.
Well, first of all, you answered your own question the way you asked it, because, of course, you're exactly right that there's a huge amount of documents that Mr. Snowden downloaded and provided to journalists, and then he asked us repeatedly to be very scrutinizing and judicious about going through the documents and weighing each one for what is in the public interest and which ones would result in harm to innocent people. And we have many thousands of documents that we've had for 5 months now. And I think we've published a grand total of something like 200 or 250 documents, which shows just how extremely careful we're being. Secondly, it is not true that every country intercepts the personal communications of their democratically elected allies. And it's definitely not the case that every country mass bulk collects the communications of millions of innocent people in virtually every country around the world. It's only the United States that's doing that, and probably only the US and China engaged in this massive economic espionage. And it's something that the world didn't know, and now they do know, and that's the reason why US officials are so angry, not because it damaged national security, but because it damages their reputation and credibility around the world.
Yeah, I mean, you know that U.S. Ambassador Albright, or Secretary of State, was spied upon the French. So there is a lot of knowledge about spying amongst leaders. But about your issue, what you just said now, American officials are pretty angry. Obviously, you just heard what Mike Morell said. He called what Snowden has done the biggest damage to, national intelligence ever since the whole thing began. What do you say to people like Prime Minister Cameron or law enforcement who say that actually what's happened is that the world has become a more dangerous place because now all these bad guys know how we're listening to them and we're not able to do as much intercepting and stopping of these potentially, damaging plots as we could in the past?
Let's just use our common sense when analyzing the claims of political officials when they say that. Ever since 9/11, British and American officials have screamed terrorism over and over and over every time they get caught doing bad things they shouldn't do, from lying to the public about invading Iraq to setting up a worldwide torture regime to kidnapping people and taking them around the world to be tortured. They just want to put the population in fear by saying the terrorists will get you if you don't submit to whatever authority it is that we want to do. And that's all they're doing here. It's the same tactic they always use. Let's just use common sense. Every terrorist who's capable of tying their own shoes has long known that the US government and the UK government are trying to monitor their communications in every way that they can. That isn't new. We didn't reveal anything to the terrorists that they didn't already know. What we revealed is that the spying system is largely devoted not to terrorists, but is directed at innocent people around the world. That is what was not previously known. And that is why American and British officials are so angry, because they wanted to hide what the true purpose of the spying system is from the people at whom it's directed. And that is the only thing that's new in what we reported.
So you, in conjunction with the French newspaper, you helped them, with the story about the 70 million plus phone calls and other emails and things that have been tapped from French citizens. This is what the chairman of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, told CNN this weekend. I want you to react when you hear it.
I would argue, by the way, if the French citizens knew exactly what that was about, they would be applauding and popping champagne corks. It's a good thing. It keeps the French safe. It keeps the U.S. safe. It keeps our European allies safe.
So it's about safety, Glenn.
Well, first of all, a lot of people like to ask, why is there so much anti-American sentiment around the world? All you have to do is listen to that tape of Mike Rogers to understand it. He basically is going around telling the world that they ought to be grateful that without their knowledge, we're stealing all of their communications data and invading their privacy. None of this has anything to do with terrorism. Is Angela Merkel a terrorist? Are 60 or 70 million Spanish and French citizens terrorists? Are there terrorists at Petrobras? This is clearly about political power and economic espionage.
Okay.
And the claim that this is all about terrorism is seen around the world as what it is, which is pure deceit.
So what I really want to know, because this is really fascinating now, this joint venture that you've gone into or going into with the co-founder of eBay, you know, he told me that this was going to be something new and different in terms of investigative reporting and activism. I mean, he used that word, and I know you have as well. Tell me what we can see and what you plan to do with this new venture.
So I think there's been a lot of serious radical flaws in American journalism, and it's one of the reasons why American media institutions are held in such low esteem. And I think one of the principal ones is that they're supposed to be watchdogs over people in political power, and yet they've become extremely close to those in power. Watch how often on television and the major newspapers, reports are nothing more than American officials told me yesterday, and there's no effort to investigate those claims or to find alternative voices. And what we believe is that journalism is about providing accountability and checks to those in power, and that's what this institution is designed to do, to find truly independent journalists who don't want to be invited to Washington cocktail parties and be invited to the houses of the officials over whom they're supposed to be watchdogs, but who are truly devoted to investigating whether or not the claims from government and corporate officials are true and revealing to the world what the truth is without fear of threats or other kinds of repercussions that the government likes to dole out to keep people afraid. And this institution is devoted first and foremost to that model of journalism.
All right, Glenn Greenwald, thank you for joining me, and we'll continue this conversation.